Hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming out to our CTEI Webinette on accessibility basics and your teaching practice. For those of you whom I haven't had the pleasure of meeting just yet, my name is Tommy Mayberry. My pronouns are he, she, and they, so please use any of those three series to refer to me with respect. And I'm the director of our Center for Teaching Excellence and Innovation here at Yorkville University and Toronto Film School. Going to pop into the chat here the links to my speaker notes as well as to my slides for accessibility. And so you can follow along, save them for later, resist scribbling down notes on everything I say if that's your style, and just listen in and engage as best fits with your style. And the speaker notes and slides will be available on the CTEI website after today's website too. Sorry, after today's Webinette too. The Webinette genre of teaching center programming is one that I owe to my dear colleague, Dr. Cosette Lemelin, who was my deputy director during my time at the University of Alberta Centre for Teaching and Learning. Dr. Lemelin created Wednesday Webinettes to address a need and balance within faculty members of time constraints and workflows, as well as diverse types of engagements. Because as she often said, not everyone always wants to go to a 90-minute online workshop and actively participate because sometimes we only have 10 to 15 minutes to listen and learn. So I'm humbled and honored to continue this type of teaching center offering with us here at Yorkville U TFS of short pedagogical presentations, which is being recorded, followed by interactive discussion and Q&A, which will not be recorded. To open us in a good way today, I'd like to start our Webinette together by sharing with you all the land story and territorial acknowledgement that I'm working on as I continue to learn, unlearn, and relearn about the lands on and across which we work. Because at Yorkville University and Toronto Film School, we work across physical and online campuses that are built on and draw resources from treaty lands and territories in this nation now called Canada, as well as traditional territories of diverse Indigenous peoples and nations. Our campus in what is now known as New Brunswick sits on land under the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1760 and 1761, on the land of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Mi'kmaq, and the Wolastoqiyik-Molzeet First Nation. The black and white picture on this slide on the top right is a scan of the archived document of the signatures on the Peace and Friendship Treaty, bringing that history of New Brunswick right to us in and for our work. The picture on the top left is a scan of the archived document of the signatures at the bottom of Treaty 13. Our campuses in what is today known as downtown Toronto, as well as the Steeles neighborhood in Toronto, sit on treaty land of the Toronto Purchase of 1787, also known as Treaty 13, which is the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This is part of our living history on these lands in southwestern Ontario today. And our campus in what is now known as British Columbia is not treaty land, but sits on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, and Kakite First Nations. Being unceded and not having ever entered into signing treaty agreements with the Government of Canada, there is no archival picture of any ratified signatures. So I bring this black and white archival photo of the main Kwantlen winter encampment that became the site of New Westminster. Here, the site is viewed from the Surrey shore of the Fraser River, and of course, our BC campus is specifically built in New Westminster, right on this land shown here. I open in this way, as I said, as I continue to learn, unlearn, and relearn about the lands we work on and across, but also because, as I've been taught by Indigenous peers, elders, friends, and loved ones, digital space is Indigenous space too. And we are meeting today to talk about accessibility basics in teaching. And this conversation is not separate from our history, responsibilities, growth, and evolution. We need always to know, honor, and remember where we've come from so we can navigate powerfully where we're going and where we want to go. It is my hope for us in this session today that by the end of our time together, we should be able to define the term accessibility and outline why it is essential in our teaching roles at Yorkville U and Toronto Film School. And we should be able to identify and describe basic level accessibility principles that you can implement immediately and apply with your teaching materials to enhance accessibility and remove barriers for student engagement and success. Now, before I bring up a perhaps more meaningful and concrete definition of accessibility for our teaching and learning context, if you do a quick Google search of define accessibility, Google will tell us that accessibility is the quality of being able to be reached or entered. The quality of being able to be, the quality of being easy to obtain or use, and the quality of being easily understood or appreciated. And putting it all together, Google says then that accessibility is the quality of being easily reached, entered, or used by people who have a disability. So, well, that's all well and good. And it actually is a helpful starting place, I think, to think about these qualities and phrases. Being able to be reached, being easy to obtain and use, being easily understood or appreciated. So, when it comes to our teaching and learning context, let's concretely establish that something is accessible when it is designed to meet established accessibility principles, guidelines, and requirements, when it can be used, reached, or entered into by the majority of people with and without disabilities, and when it can be easily and readily adapted to an alternative version to meet accommodation needs when and if they arise. Now, that definition of accessibility mentions accommodations. And as Dr. Christine Zaza at the University of Waterloo says, quote, when we're talking about accessibility, we also think about accommodation. And while the terms are often used interchangeably, they're not exactly the same thing, though they both contribute to improving access and breaking down barriers, end quote. But, Dr. Zaza importantly points out, they are very different in the way they roll out. Here at Yorkville U TFS, we situate academic accommodations as individual supports that remove barriers to give students an equal opportunity to participate in their program of study and demonstrate their learning without reducing essential requirements or academic integrity. So while both accommodations and accessibility contribute to improving access and to breaking down barriers, accommodations are individual, student by student, case by case approaches and interventions, whereas accessibility is a wider approach, intending to improve access and to breaking down barriers for the widest majority of people to make increasing access a reality for us all. And while this CTEI Webinette is about accessibility and not decidedly about accommodations, we do have team members from the Yorkville U TFS Academic Accommodations and Accessibility Office joining us today to speak to any questions that intersect with accommodations procedures in our conversation together at the end of this pedagogical presentation and recording. And for folks watching the recording, we will link to the policy and to contact info on the CTEI website. In addition to our duty of care as faculty and staff in higher education, in tandem with increasingly accessible education being key to improving student learning, reducing the work and stigma associated with accommodations, and increasing student engagement as our lessons and content reach broader audiences, accessibility is essential in our teaching roles at Yorkville U and Toronto Film School because it is ensconced in our core values. Specifically, our core value of fueling learning potential that outlines that we ensure that the student experience is at the center of what we do, as well as our core value of building inclusive communities that outlines that we ensure that all individuals are valued, respected, and included. Accessibility is in our lifeblood here at Yorkville U TFS, literally part of our beating heart as an institution of higher education. So let's get into some basic level accessibility principles that we can implement immediately today, shall we? I want to open and close with the Microsoft Accessibility Checker. So yes, you will hear this again and again at the close of our time together today. In the main bar at the top of the Microsoft PowerPoint application is the Review tab. And when you click on that, it will bring up a bunch of review options, one of which is Check Accessibility. By clicking this, it'll bring up the accessibility assistant that will take you through some of the need to fix as well as should fix aspects of your slideshows in terms of accessibility. While it won't catch every issue, this is a great tool to have at the ready and to make a point of using every time you are creating and or editing your slideshows. And it helps remind us, and even I would say it helps teach us about what we should be thinking about with accessibility in our PowerPoint presentations and wider document creation and accessibility principles. It goes over things like color and contrast, media and illustrations, tables, document structure, reading order, and more. For the rest of this webinar today, I'm going to focus on 3 of these: formatting your text, alt text for images, and color considerations. Formatting your text. Always keep your learners and readers, and especially your learners as readers, in mind when you're formatting the text on your slides. Some wise practices here are using a sans serif font, such as Aptos, Arial, Calibri, Helvetica. Set the line spacing to 1.5. This helps allow for sufficient white space on your slides, which increases focus on content as well as appropriate pacing for you as the instructor. Keep your text left aligned. This helps learners and readers identify new lines. Keep font size at 18 point or larger. This is key for both online and on-site teaching and learning, as well as for asynchronous and synchronous teaching and learning in terms of readability and legibility too. And break large chunks of text into a list or lists. This makes it easier to read, provides a visual structure, and highlights the key points for you and for your students. Activating and embodying these 5 practices with formatting your text on your slides not only helps with learner and reader attention and not becoming overwhelmed in content or left behind in terms of pacing, but it helps you as the instructor focus and limit your content on each slide. In other words, if what you're trying to get across on one slide doesn't fit on one slide and adhering to these 5 points here, and you're tempted to decrease your font size, to reformat to 1 point line spacing, and or to have full paragraphs of text, realize or remember, you don't actually have one slide's worth of content, do you? You need additional slides. Alt text for images. Another basic level accessibility principle to always keep in mind and have on your mental or physical checklist in creating your slides is with the images you include on your slides and making sure they're accessible too. And this is done with alternative text or alt text. Some wise practices here are adding alt text to all non-decorative images. For every image that you are using to convey meaning, you need to make sure the equivalent information is available to someone who may not be able to see the image. Keep alt text writing short and descriptive, focused on the intent and context of the image. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but alt text length actually should follow another cultural icon, the 140 character social media post. Yep, that's it. The length of your alt text should be no longer than what we once upon a time called a tweet. And you don't need to include image of or photo of in your alt text description. Just start describing your image. Screen readers reading aloud the alt text to someone who may not be able to see the image will already add this in for you. But if it's an illustration or a different medium, like a painting or a movie still or a screenshot, you can say that medium to help describe the intent and context further. And color considerations. The last basic level accessibility principle we'll cover today is how we consider and use color in our slides and presentations. Some wise practices here are: use high color contrast. Choose a color for your text and other elements, such as highlighting or shapes, including shape outlines and shape fills, that has a high degree of contrast against the background color or the color you're putting them on top of. Put light text on dark backgrounds and dark text on light backgrounds. A keynote here: the accessibility assistant in Microsoft PowerPoint's Check Accessibility, again under the Review tab, will check color and contrast for hard to read text contrast, and it will flag this for you. And make sure you combine color with at least one other element, such as size, shape, position, and/or text, to convey meaning. When communicating via just color alone, your meaning can be missed or misunderstood by learners and readers who can't see color. And a keynote here: for added accessibility checking, turn your slide grayscale to see for yourself if everything you're intending to come through still comes through in the absence of color. You can do this under accessibility in PowerPoint by clicking on Inspect Without Color to see how it looks in grayscale. So, To recap these basic level accessibility principles here from today, as we close the recorded portion of our CTEI Webinette and get ready to move into our unrecorded Q&A and discussion together, use the Microsoft Accessibility Checker as you're building your slides and slide decks, and be open to having it teach you as you go about accessible design. Format your text accessibly in terms of sans serif and appropriate line spacing, left alignment, font size, and chunking of text into lists. Add alt text to your images that is short, descriptive, and for conveying meaning that is non-decorative. And consider color in terms of contrast and using more than one element to convey meaning than just color alone. So in languages we speak across this nation now called Canada, I'd like to say miigwech, marci, niawe, thank you, and merci for coming out to our CTI Webinette today. And I will stop the recording now so we can move into our discussion and Q&A together.